Imagine you are an executive of a beverage corporation. You are sitting in a meeting room smelling of tobacco and old wood in Moscow, 1989. Opposite you are not retailers or advertisers, but high-ranking military officials of the Soviet Union with uniforms full of medals. On the negotiation table, instead of marketing plans or sales, they push toward you a stack of military technical documents. They do not pay you in cash. They also do not pay in gold. They give you 17 attack submarines, a cruiser, a destroyer, and a frigate. That is right. You did not hear it wrong. This is not a fantasy war movie, but one of the strangest, boldest, and most unbelievable deals in global business history. At that moment, PepsiCo, a carbonated soft drink company, officially owned the sixth largest naval fleet in the world. How did a beverage company end up disarming a nuclear superpower? And why was the Soviet Union ready to trade its military power just for bottles of soda? Welcome to the story of Donald Kendall, the entrepreneurial spirit despite geopolitical barriers, and the soda for warships deal that changed the definition of international trade forever. Part 1. Starting from a paper cup and a historic confrontation. To understand why submarines appeared on the negotiation table in 1989, we must go back 30 years before that, the summer of 1959. The context, then, was the peak of the Cold War. The world was divided by the Iron Curtain. One side was the United States with capitalism. The other side was the Soviet Union with communism. Two superpowers were growling at each other with nuclear arsenals enough to destroy the Earth many times. However, amidst that tense atmosphere, a small gap appeared. The US and Soviet governments agreed to organize cultural exhibitions to exchange understanding. The Americans opened an exhibition at Sokolniki Park, Moscow, showcasing the best of the American dream, from washing machines, shiny cars, to modern kitchens. Donald Kendall, then head of Pepsi's international division, saw an opportunity that no one else saw. While other American companies hesitated to set foot in the enemy's land, Kendall craved it. He knew that if he wanted to defeat his arch-rival Coca-Cola, he needed to capture markets that Coke hadn't touched yet. But there was a big problem. The Russians didn't know what Pepsi was, and they didn't like things representing American capitalism. Kendall made a risky move. He approached then U.S. Vice President Richard Nixon, an old friend of his. The night before the exhibition opened, Kendall told Nixon, "I need you to help me put a Pepsi in Khrushchev's hand. Otherwise, I'll be in big trouble with the board." The next day, the world witnessed a historic moment: the kitchen debate. Nixon and Nikita Khrushchev, the powerful leader of the Soviet Union, were arguing fiercely about the merits of two economic systems right in a model American kitchen. When the atmosphere became heated, Nixon skillfully led Khrushchev to the Pepsi counter. Kendall had prepared two types of Pepsi, one mixed with American water and one mixed with Moscow water. He wanted to prove that Pepsi could become part of Russian life. Khrushchev picked up the cup, took a big sip. Photographers clicked continuously. The next day, the image of the world's top communist leader enjoying the symbol of capitalism appeared on the front page of every major newspaper. That wasn't just a photo, it was an invaluable marketing victory. Pepsi had the biggest endorsement in history from the man threatening to bury America. More importantly, the Soviet people became curious. What was this black fizzy water that made their leader so satisfied? Part 2. Economic Problem and Solution from Vodka Bottles. The 1959 event opened the door, but it took over a decade later, in 1972, for Donald Kendall to officially bring Pepsi into the Soviet market. This was a historic milestone. Pepsi became the first American consumer product produced and sold in the Soviet Union. However, a huge barrier appeared immediately: Currency. The Soviet ruble was then a non-convertible currency. This meant Soviet law prohibited taking rubles across the border, and no international bank accepted rubles for dollars. Imagine yourself as Pepsi. You have 280 million potential customers craving your product, but they cannot pay you in any currency you can use to pay employees or buy ingredients in America. Many would give up. But Donald Kendall didn't. He looked at what the Soviet Union had that the Western world craved. The answer was vodka. A breakthrough deal was signed. Pepsi would send soda concentrate to the Soviet Union for local bottling. In return, the Soviets would pay with exclusive distribution rights for Stolichnaya vodka in the U.S. market. This was barter on the largest industrial scale in history. The result was perfect. Pepsi became a craze in the Soviet Union. Long lines of people waited just to buy a soda. By the late 1980s, Pepsi had over 20 bottling plants across the Soviet Union. Conversely, Stolichnaya vodka became extremely popular in the US thanks to Pepsi's distribution network. However, by the late 80s, the world began to change. The Soviet Union fell into a severe economic crisis. The war in Afghanistan and the arms race exhausted their resources. The demand for Pepsi among Russians was higher than ever, but the vodka they produced was no longer enough to pay Pepsi. The contract was about to expire. Pepsi wanted to expand dozens more plants. The Soviet Union wanted more soda to soothe public dissatisfaction, but they didn't have enough vodka. So, how does a bankrupt superpower pay debt? The answer lay in rusting military ports. Part 3. When soda becomes military power. In the spring of 1989, a new deal was brought to the table, and this time, it amazed the whole world. To maintain the flow of Pepsi into its territory, the Soviet government made an offer no food company had ever received. They would pay with a fleet of old warships. The deal included 17 attack submarines, 1 cruiser, 1 destroyer, 1 frigate, and several large oil tankers for resale. The total value was estimated at $3 billion then. Let's stop to analyze this. With 17 submarines, Pepsi naturally owned a submarine fleet larger than Britain, France, or India at that time. If Pepsi decided to keep this fleet, they could block any seaport in the world or become a formidable military force in the Caribbean. Pepsi executives sat in a meeting room in Moscow, looking at technical drawings of submarines. They were experts in sugar, CO2, and advertising campaigns, now facing the reception of weapons of mass destruction. But Donald Kendall, with sharp, strategic vision, agreed. Why? Because he knew the value of scrap steel. At that time, global demand for recycled steel was rising. These warships, though old and disarmed, were still giant blocks of steel containing immense value. News of Pepsi owning a naval fleet spread quickly. U.S. National Security Advisor Brent Scowcroft called Kendall worriedly. "Donald, what on earth are you doing with a Soviet submarine fleet?" Kendall replied with a famous quote, "I am disarming the Soviet Union faster than you are." That wasn't just a joke. It was an ironic truth. While the U.S. government spent trillions and decades negotiating to cut nuclear weapons, Pepsi just sold soda and removed 20 warships from the Soviet Navy's active service. That is the power of soft power. It's proof that economics and the desire for consumer freedom can pierce steel walls that bullets cannot. Part 4. The fate of the Pepsi fleet and expensive lessons. So, what did Pepsi do with its fleet? Did they paint the Pepsi logo on submarines and organize tours? Unfortunately for those who like drama, Pepsi is a practical company. They had no intention of operating a navy. Immediately after the handover, Pepsi signed a contract with a Norwegian shipbreaking company, Aker Yards. All 17 submarines and other warships were towed to Norway. There, they were butchered, dismantled into scrap steel. Pepsi received cash from selling steel, real US dollars, to report profit to shareholders. However, the joy was short-lived. Just 2 years after that historic deal, in 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. This collapse pushed Pepsi into an unprecedented logistics nightmare. Suddenly, their bottling plants were scattered across 15 newly independent countries. One factory in Ukraine, sugar supply in Kazakhstan, and bottle caps from another country. Moreover, rival Coca-Cola, sidelined for decades, took this opportunity to flood the Russian market with massive marketing campaigns and abundant cash. Pepsi's monopoly ended. But regardless, the Warships for Soda deal of 1989 remains a brilliant testament to think outside the box thinking. Part 5. Why this story matters to you today. The story of Pepsi's fleet isn't just an interesting history snippet. It contains deep business lessons and strategic thinking that any of us can apply. 1. Never accept impossible as the final answer. When facing a market without cash, 99% of companies will withdraw. Donald Kendall was in the remaining 1%. He understood that if there is demand, there will be a way to pay. Value isn't just in paper money, it's in assets. Lesson: look for value where others only see waste or barriers. 2. Brand power. Why did Khrushchev drink Pepsi? Why did Russians line up for it? Because Pepsi wasn't just soda. It represented a lifestyle, a breath of freedom and modernity. If you build a brand with intense attraction, you can cross all political borders. 3. Flexibility in negotiation. This deal teaches us to achieve goals, sometimes you must step out of your expertise. Pepsi became a vodka broker, a warship fleet owner, and a scrap steel dealer, all just to sell soda. Don't limit yourself to the label, "I only do work A." Do whatever it takes to bring value. 4. Beware of the changes of the times. Pepsi won in a stable Cold War world, but fumbled when that world collapsed. Today's success can be tomorrow's trap if we don't continuously adapt. Conclusion and call to action. Today, if you walk along Norwegian seaports, you won't find any traces of the Pepsi fleet. They've become aluminum cans, building steel frames, or maybe part of the cars you drive. But the spirit of that deal remains. It reminds us that in business and life, the craziest opportunities often lie behind the toughest challenges. Donald Kendall passed away in 2020 at 99. But his legacy of a man who disarmed a superpower with soda will always be retold as a legend of human audacity. What about you? If you are facing a seemingly insurmountable obstacle in your career or project, ask yourself, where is my submarine? Is there hidden value you are ignoring? Is there an alternative payment method you haven't thought of? If you find this story inspiring, please like and share this video. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications to not miss deep analyses of classic deals and business lessons that change the world. Leave a comment below. If you were Pepsi's CEO in 1989, would you keep that submarine fleet or sell them? And what strange business story do you want us to analyze next? Thanks for watching. Always keep a creative, fierce spirit and don't hesitate to trade soda for warships if the opportunity comes knocking at your door. See you in the next exploration journeys. Thank you for being part of our community.